The first time my neighbor ever told me to turn around, she was standing in my driveway in a Cleveland Browns hoodie with dirt on both knees, and my spare house key in her fist. "Ava," she said, grabbing my wrist before I could reach the porch. "Don't go in there. Just turn around and breathe." I thought she was being dramatic. Then she angled me toward the front window. Inside my kitchen, my husband was standing beside his mother, a locksmith, and a woman in a navy blazer with a rolling briefcase. My pill bottle was on the counter. An empty wine bottle was beside it. And taped to my refrigerator, right under my daughter's spelling test, was a sheet of paper with the words emergency custody affidavit printed across the top. That was the exact moment my marriage ended. Not when I found out Mason had been lying. Not when I learned what he'd done with our money. It ended there in Dublin, Ohio on a windy Tuesday in March, when I realized my husband wasn't just betraying me. He was building a version of me he could hand to a judge. My name is Ava Mercer. I was 38 then, a pediatric dental hygienist, mother of two, the person in our house who remembered inhalers, dentist appointments, library due dates, and which stuffed animal had to be washed before bedtime or nobody slept. That afternoon, my son Noah's school had called because he'd left his rescue inhaler in the side pocket of my SUV after baseball practice. I left work early, still wearing cartoon tooth earrings and pink scrub pants under my coat. I remember being annoyed, not afraid. I remember thinking maybe Mason would laugh when I told him I'd driven all the way home for something sitting right there in the cup holder. Instead, my neighbor Terry dragged me behind her hydrangea hedge and whispered, "I heard them." I stared at her. "He changed the locks?" Her mouth tightened. "That too. But Ava listened to me. He told his mother if you came in yelling, it would help." "Help what?" She held up her phone. Terry was 66, widowed, retired from a title office, and nosy in the most life-saving way a person can be. Her doorbell camera covered more of our shared property line than either of our houses probably deserved. 10 minutes earlier, while kneeling in her flower bed, she had heard Mason on the porch saying, "Don't argue with her. Just keep recording. If she cries, we mention the medication. If she gets loud, we call the sheriff." My whole body went cold. I looked through my own kitchen window again. Mason's mother, Darlene, was rearranging the counter. She moved the wine bottle closer to my pills. Then she stepped back to take a picture. The woman in the blazer opened a folder and asked something I couldn't hear. Mason smiled in that calm, reasonable voice he used whenever he wanted strangers to think he was the sane one in the room. I almost walked straight into the house. Terry's grip tightened. "No, not until you know what game they're playing." So I followed her next door like a woman following instructions after a car accident, even though nothing had crashed yet. Not officially. From Terry's kitchen table we watched 15 minutes of camera footage. At 1:12 the locksmith arrived. At 1:19 Mason let him in through the garage. At 1:27, Darlene carried in 2 banker's boxes from the trunk of her Lincoln. At 1:31 the navy blazer woman arrived, checked an address on her phone, and rolled her case to my front door. At 1:34, Mason kissed Noah on the top of the head before sending both kids to Darlene's car with backpacks and blankets like they were leaving for a sleepover. At 1:36, with the children gone, Darlene placed my prescription bottle on the counter. Mason added the wine bottle. At 1:38, he said the sentence I will hear in my head for the rest of my life. "She's emotional, but once this is filed, she won't be able to blow everything up." Everything. Not us. Not our marriage. Everything. I sat back so fast the chair legs scraped tile. A month earlier, I had asked Mason a question he should have answered honestly. Why was there $32,000 missing from Lily's college account? He told me I was reading the statement wrong. When I showed him the transfer history, he said it was temporary. When I asked temporary for what, he said cash flow problems at work. When I asked why cash flow at his roofing company somehow involved our daughter's future, he got offended so quickly it almost looked rehearsed. Then came the smaller things that make sense only later. He asked where I kept our deed file. He wanted scanned copies of my signature pages for taxes. He suddenly offered to handle my medication pickup after a sinus infection, which would have been sweet if he had ever once volunteered to handle medication in 14 years of marriage. And Darlene, who normally treated my house like neutral territory, started dropping by with casseroles and long speeches about how stress can make a mother forget herself. At the time it felt annoying. Sitting in Terry's kitchen, watching my husband stage me like a cautionary tale, it felt like a blueprint. I called my younger cousin Priya, because every family has one person whose voice gets calmer when everybody else panics. Priya worked in mortgage fraud compliance for a credit union in Columbus, and when I said, "There's a woman at my house with a closing briefcase and my husband just changed the locks," she didn't waste a second. "Do not go in alone," she said. "And do not sign anything. Call the sheriff for a civil standby. If there's a loan package, photograph every page." Terry was already grabbing her purse. "I'm coming." The deputy met us 22 minutes later. Mason opened the door before I touched the knob, and for one surreal second he looked offended, like I was the one ruining his afternoon. "Ava," he said softly, glancing at the deputy, "I didn't want you upset in front of the kids." That line would have worked better if he hadn't already sent the kids away. I stepped past him just enough to see my house. My office drawers were open. My late father's document lockbox sat on the dining room table. The kitchen counter looked like a crime scene arranged by people who had only ever seen addiction in TV movies. And there, between a stack of loan papers and my framed grocery list, sat a yellow sticky note in Darlene's handwriting. "Take pick of pills closer." The woman in the blazer turned and immediately looked uncomfortable. "Sir, you told me both borrowers were present for signing." "Borrowers? Not divorce papers. A loan." I looked at Mason. "What did you put in my name?" He exhaled like I was exhausting him. "Ava, lower your voice." That was when the deputy noticed the new deadbolt packaging in the trash, and asked for identification from everybody in the room. The woman gave her card first. "Mobile notary. Third-party signing service." Darlene started talking over everyone. "We're trying to protect the grandchildren. She's been unstable for months." The deputy said, "Ma'am, that's enough." I walked to the table and saw my own signature at the bottom of a home equity line of credit application for $180,000. Secured by our house. My house too. My children's house. There was also an affidavit draft claiming I had been mixing alcohol with anti-anxiety medication and creating an unsafe emotional environment for the minor children. I don't know what hurt worse, that Mason forged my name, or that he'd chosen the one hard year of my life to turn into evidence. 3 years earlier, after a second trimester loss I barely survived emotionally, my doctor had prescribed 6 weeks of medication and therapy. I did the work. I got better. I went back to being the mother who packed lunches and color-coded camp forms and remembered Spirit Week. Mason had held me while I cried back then. Now he was using those months like a loaded weapon. "I was going to explain," he said. "No," I said. "You were going to provoke me." The room went still. Terry lifted her phone. "I have porch audio." The notary looked from Mason to me to the papers and slowly closed her briefcase. "I'm not completing this signing," Darlene snapped. "You don't know what she's like." Terry, who had buried a husband and beaten breast cancer and therefore feared no one, said, "I know exactly what staged evidence looks like." Then came the first twist Mason didn't see coming. Noah's inhaler was not in my SUV. It was in the banker's box on my dining room chair, tucked between our passports and the kids' birth certificates. I found it while looking for the deed file. That meant Noah had never left it in my car. Someone had gone into his backpack and removed it so I would come home early. So I would walk into the trap before school pickup. So there would be witnesses. So the unstable mother narrative could begin on schedule. Even Mason looked rattled when I held up the inhaler. "You used our son's asthma to get me here?" I asked. He didn't answer. Which was answer enough. The deputy separated us after that. She told Mason nobody was locking me out of my residence that day, and nobody was removing documents from the home. The notary left. Terry emailed herself the footage. Priya called back and told me to freeze every line of credit tied to my social security number before Mason could salvage anything. While I was on hold with fraud services, Lily texted me from Darlene's car. "Mom, why is Grandma saying we might live at her condo for a while? Dad says you need rest. Are we in trouble?" That text nearly broke me more than the forged signature. Because children will believe the calmest liar in the room until truth gets there first. I texted back. "No one is in trouble. Stay with Aunt Claire after school. I love you. None of this is your fault." Then the second twist landed. Priya pulled public filings faster than I thought possible, and called me back with that same terrifyingly calm voice. Ava, there was already one draw request started on the HELOC, and the destination account isn't Mason's business. It was Darlene's. Specifically, the business account for her failing sports bar in Hilliard, the one she swore was just going through a slow winter. I looked at Mason across my own kitchen, and suddenly every Sunday dinner made 6 cents. Every guilt trip. Every speech about family helping family. Every time Darlene joked that I was too protective of money that came from my father's estate. This hadn't started with me. It had started with them deciding my father's last gift to me belonged to Mason's family more than it belonged to mine. That night I didn't sleep at home. The deputy suggested space, and honestly I didn't trust what else had been arranged. The kids stayed with my sister Claire in Worthington. I stayed there too on a pull-out couch, still in my scrub pants, staring at the ceiling while Claire rage-cleaned her kitchen at midnight because that's how she processes betrayal. At 2:11 a.m., Lily came padding into the room in socks. She crawled beside me and whispered, "Dad told Noah if anybody asked, you sleep all day sometimes." I turned my face into the pillow so she wouldn't see what that did to me. By morning, grief was over. What I had left was clarity. I filed for emergency relief in Franklin County. Fraud report. Financial restraining request. Temporary parenting orders. Terry gave the footage. The notary signed an affidavit saying she had been told both spouses consented and had witnessed no lawful signing. Priya flagged the forged loan package. Claire took the kids to school and told them only this. Adults were dealing with adult dishonesty and they were safe. Mason tried to keep performing reasonable. He sent long texts about misunderstanding. He told mutual friends I was overwhelmed and spiraling. He asked if we could work through this privately for the children. Privately was rich coming from a man who had staged my kitchen like a tabloid photograph. The hearing was 8 days later. Darlene showed up in pearls and a church coat, which felt right for someone who wanted to look innocent while explaining why my children's documents were packed for relocation. Mason's lawyer looked confident for exactly 12 minutes. Then Terry's porch audio played in open court. Then the sticky note photo went in. Then the notary testified. Then Priya's fraud summary showed the incomplete draw request to Darlene's bar account. And finally, because liars usually lose to their own details, Claire produced the school app log showing Noah's inhaler had been marked packed that morning at 7:04 a.m. by Mason from his phone. He had created the reason I came home. The magistrate's face changed at that point. You can always tell when somebody stops hearing a messy marriage and starts hearing a strategy. Mason tried one last time. He said he was under pressure. He said his mother was desperate. He said he thought I'd overreact if I learned about the loan. I remember looking straight at him and thinking the worst part wasn't the theft. It was that he had studied my pain closely enough to know exactly how to counterfeit it. I was granted temporary exclusive use of the house. The credit line was frozen before funding. Mason was ordered out pending further proceedings. Darlene's little bar rescue never happened. And the court didn't appreciate forged signatures, staged evidence, or weaponized mental health claims nearly as much as Mason had hoped. He caught me outside afterward near the courthouse steps. "Ava, please," he said. I was trying to save my family. I turned around then. Not because I still loved him. Not because I wanted closure. Because I wanted him to hear this from the woman he had tried to erase. "You didn't try to save your family," I said. "You tried to choose which part of it was disposable." For the first time since this started, he had no answer. That was 9 months ago. The house is quieter now. Healthier too. Noah keeps his inhaler in the same blue basket by the door, and nobody touches it but him. Lily still asks hard questions in the car, usually when I'm least ready, which I'm learning is how children tell the truth. Terry still gardens like she's preparing for battle, and every time I bring her lemon bars she acts offended before accepting them. People always ask if I knew my marriage was over the second I saw that paper on the fridge. No. I knew it was over when my neighbor said, "Turn around," and I realized she wasn't telling me to run. She was telling me not to walk blindly into somebody else's story about me. That was the day I stopped defending myself against lies I didn't create. That was the day my children saw the difference between a parent who protects and a parent who performs. And that was the day my marriage ended. Right there in my own driveway, Because once the person beside you starts rehearsing your collapse, the love is already gone. All that's left is whether you see it in time.